Okay, so the last unit in interest rate risk management is forward rate agreement. A forward rate agreement is also an over-the-counter transaction designed to fix the interest rate that will apply to either borrowing or lending at a certain principal during a specified period of time. So you're trying to fix the interest rate that will apply to either borrowing or lending on a certain principal and for a certain period of time. So a swap can be characterized as actually a portfolio of forward rate agreements. So it's similar to a swap transaction. But instead of swaps have multiple transactions, forward rate agreement is for one transaction only. So for example, I will need to borrow cash for a 3-month period starting in 2 months time. So this person needs to borrow cash for a period of 3 months, but not now, after 2 months. So after 2 months, he will borrow for 3 months. So that makes the total time period 5 months. I have an arrangement with a bank that will allow me to borrow at LIBOR plus 0.5%. So the agreement that they have is of LIBOR plus 0.5%. So let me just draw a diagram. So we have our company. I have an arrangement with a bank that will allow me to borrow at LIBOR plus 0.5%. I believe that interest rates will rise over the 2 months, so that if I wait, I will have to have a high borrowing cost than if I could borrow now. I therefore arrange a 2 or a VF. 2 VF simply means that after 2 months and for the next 3 months. So 2 VF FRA, whereby I will pay a fixed rate. So it's going to pay a fixed rate and going to receive, then that means the LIBOR fixed rate, which is agreed with the bank at 5.22%, so 5.22%, and receive LIBOR for the net result will be a cost of 5.72%. So over here we have the bank. Now we need to see that is the net result actually 5.72% or not. So you can do it in exactly the same way that you do it for a swap. He's going to pay fixed 5.22%, right? And he's going to receive LIBOR, so plus LIBOR. And he's going to pay LIBOR 0.5%. So LIBOR plus 0.5%. Open the bracket that, okay, so open the bracket. So you will have negative over here. Now do the calculation. LIBOR and LIBOR gets cancelled out and you have 5.22%, 0.5%. So both of them will get added up. So this will become 5.72% negative because this is your total borrowing cost. This is exactly what's happened. The diagram is also provided to you. The net cost calculation is also provided to you. Now, what are the settlement rules? The buyer in an FRA is a party paying the FRA rate and receiving the LIBOR. So the buyer is the one that will be paying the fixed rate and receiving the floating rate. The seller in an FRA is a party receiving the FRA rate and paying the LIBOR rate. So if you're a seller of the FRA, you will be paying the floating and you will be receiving the fixed rate. The buyer pays the seller if LIBOR is fixed lower than the FRA rate, and the seller pays the buyer if LIBOR is fixed higher than the FRA rate. So it's simply the same thing that was happening in swap, that you saw that when the floating rate was going up, the person who is supposed to pay floating will have to pay to the person who's going to receive the fixed. So do not get confused because of this. We can just figure it out through the question itself. For example, it is now Thursday, 13th March 2003. I will need to borrow USD 1 million for a 3-month period starting in 2 months, right? So again, it's a 2 VF because he wants it after 2 months for the next 3 months. I purchase at 5.2 on a notional amount. Assume that the LIBOR so calculated for the period is 5.05. So this is the floating rate and this is the fixed rate. Now this is the settlement amount formula that is used for FRA. The notional principal multiplied, you have the FRA rate minus floating rate, days in the FRA period, year, 1 plus the floating rate. So you just need to plug in the values, okay? The notional amount is this much. The FRA rate was 5.22%. The floating rate was 5.05%. It is for 3 months, so that makes it 91 days. And I think it's for USD, that's why you have 360. So just plug in all of the values. This is the settlement amount. Now, who is going to pay the settlement amount? Because I purchased the FRA and the rates went down, I will pay the FRA settlement rather than receive it. Because you had purchased the FRA agreement and the rates actually went down. So you were the fixed rate payer, right? The fixed rate payer, and the floating rate went down. That means you will have to pay. If the floating rate goes up, then the person who is supposed to pay the floating rate will have to pay. Getting my point? It's simple. Do not get confused. So if the fixed rate, if the floating rate goes down, then of course the person who has fixed will have to pay. And if the floating goes up, the person who's supposed to pay the floating will have to pay. That's it.